Okay, so today we're going to talk about the continuation of our order service. This service also communicates with another service, the menu. And in order to communicate with that, we created a proxy class. Basically, creating a proxy means that you are separating the concerns. So this is a great way to separate the infrastructure from your business logic. So let's say that your menu service, for example, goes down, right? And you want to make sure that you start a new instance of that menu in another URL. How can you make sure that the orders is going to know what is this new URL and is going to be able to communicate with that? And the way that we are going to solve this is by using a functionality called Service Discovery. And the name of the tool that we're going to use is Consul from HashiCorp. Okay, so this is the Consul website. The way that we're going to use Consul is downloading the Docker image of Consul. Okay, so to get more details, you can go to hub.docker.com/_consul. Let's go and do a Docker pull. Let's hit enter. It's going to start to download the image for us. All right, so now that the image is downloaded, you can do Docker images. In my case, it was very fast because it was already downloaded, but you do Docker space images, and then you're gonna see that we have Consul over here. Okay, so now let's run the Consul agent. There's a big actually command line. You don't need to memorize that. In my experience here in my Windows machine, we are running Linux Docker images, okay? In a Windows 10 machine, I needed to put double quotes. If I don't put double quotes, it doesn't work. So after I put all of this, I hit enter. So let's see if it starts. All right, so it looks like it started, but we never know. We need to go to Docker PS. When we do Docker PS, here it is, right? We can see the Consul image already started as a container. Localhost 8500. By doing this, we have the Consul user interface. Now that we have Consul running in our machine, we are going to register services there. So it will be our catalog that contains the location, right, the URL and port of all the services that we are going to expose in the future. All right, so now we need to register the menu in the Consul. Okay, in order to do this, we need to create a service class that runs whenever the web server starts. I'm gonna go here and create a singleton instance, and I'll add a singleton of, let's call iConsul register service, right? And let's call Consul register service here. I'll generate a class for iConsul register service, a public class Consul register service, inheriting from iHosted service. When we do this, we need to implement the two methods that iHosted service contains. One is the start async, and the other one is stop async. This start async is triggered right after the server starts. Okay, so now before we move forward, let's just make sure that we have the Consul library. Let's do it by going to the NuGet, the manage NuGet packages, searching for Consul. So I choose Consul by PlayFab and clicking install. This SDK, at the end of the day, just actually triggers the HTTP APIs from the Consul service. So let's first create a constructor. All right, so here in the constructor, I'm going to inject some instances. The first instance that I'm going to inject is ConsulClient. This is the one that will allow us to communicate with Consul. Let's just make sure that we resolve the usings, right? So it's using Consul in this case. Let's create a field here. And then let's just make sure to set the ConsulClient in here. So let's go to the app settings first. So for the menu information, we're going to define a URL parameter. But for now, just to make it simple, let's define the URL of the menu over here in this parameter. Other than this, let's think about the Consul parameters now. For the Consul, we need to have the URL of the service, of the Consul service. We need to know that Consul is running on localhost 8500. We also need to define what is going to be the service name of the menu, right? So let's define service name of the menu as menu. So what is going to be the service ID of this instance? Let's define here service ID, and the service ID of this instance is going to be menu 1. So let's go to the startup. Okay, so continuing here, we are going to add the configuration. We need to configure that configuration dot get section, and let's get the first section, which in our case is going to be menu. Okay, we're going to call this menu. The second section is going to be configuration.getSection, and this is going to be the second one is the console. All right, so what's missing here? Actually, what is missing is that I need to specify what is the type to where it is going to bind all of this configuration. So let's define here. I'm going to define menu configuration, right? And I'm also going to define here a console configuration. Let's define these two classes. Both classes are going to contain, it's just like a model class. So let's just get the app settings information so we can build them appropriately. Let's use some convention, camel case. Let's get all this now, copy to the startup, and then start to structure the information here. Simple as that. All right, with these two configurations in hand, let's go and inject them in the console register service. Okay, so I think we need to bring here the I option because it's not available in this instance. It's using Microsoft.extensions.options. Yes, we do have it here. As we have it here, now we can use it. And then we just specify menu configuration, which is going to be menu configuration over here. The other thing that we need to specify is the console configuration. Then we go to create like 3 fields here. These 3 fields are going to be one with the console configuration, the other one with the menu configuration. Okay, so now let's put them here in the constructor. Let me just fix this because it's showing as an error here. Now let's go to the start async. And here in the start async, I'm going to start using the console client. To use the console client, I do client.agent service register. First, we need to deregister whatever was registered in terms of this menu, right? Because maybe I changed the URL and I'm starting again and then I have a new URL. And then we are going to register. What do I need to receive here? I need to receive the service ID, which we already know where we can capture. In the menu configuration, we can get the value. One important thing, we can store the value directly. We don't need to store the I options, right? So let's just store the value here. It makes it much simpler. So menu configuration dot service ID. Perfect. What else? We need a cancellation token. And what is the cancellation token that we're going to pass? This one. Then we are going to register. And to register the service, we need to start an agent service registration. So let's define this agent service registration here. And then we go new agent service registration. Let's see what data we actually need. We need to inform the address first, menu configuration dot URL. Define the name. The name is going to be menu configuration dot name, service name. We need the port, and now we need to be able to actually extract from the URL the port. We need to define here a URI and then do a new URI and inform as a parameter of this URI the menu configuration.url. You just use like menu URI. We need to get the host. In this case, here we need to get the port. The last two things we need are the ID and also the tags, an array of tags, the menu configuration dot service name. For the ID, we can define any ID as semantic as possible. So in this case, what I'm going to do is define menu configuration dot service ID. Then you get the service configuration and you use it over here. We also need a cancellation token. This is a task. We need to return a task as a response. We can transform this method in public async task. If we do this, it means that here we can await these two executions and then it's going to run one after the other. Start async is going to be asynchronous so it doesn't block, but this activity here will happen one and then the other. Okay, so with this, we created the basic implementation of our start async. Some other things are missing still in the startup section. Okay, so now we're going to actually add the console client and inject that on top of our solution. So let's go back here to the startup and in the configure services, we're going to put services.add singleton. iConsulClient and ConsulClient. All right, so now that we defined this singleton, we are going to override that to define our own factory. So let's define it. The first one is going to be the provider, which is the service provider. And the second one is actually the console client that we need to return. And then let's define new console client. This new console client will receive some parameters also inside. It can receive the configuration, okay? So let's define the configuration as well. Config.address. It's the URL where the console is actually running. So let's just create here a variable and define. This is going to be the console address. In order to parse this console address, let's do configuration.getSection console. So let's define here URL, and then we're going to be able to retrieve that information. This is what we're going to pass here. So great. We can do new URI and pass as a first parameter the console address. The only thing that is missing now is in the stop async, you also need to deregister. So let's go here and do almost the same as we did here. So let's see. Oh, yeah, we need to set this to be async. So then it's going to work well with the await. Let's just make sure that we are going to put a try catch here, because let's suppose, for example, you are stopping the server, but you haven't even started to register anything. So in this case, it's a good idea to put a catch and then try to capture the exception that we could have here. So I'm going to put iLogger, and this guy is going to also have a field. So let's just click and using Microsoft extensions logging. Done. So now let's go back to the code where we have the try-catch and log that appropriately. Okay, so now I think we got everything. Let's just execute our solution and see how it goes. I'm gonna click and put a breakpoint in the start async. This is going to be hit as soon as we run the solution. All right, so that actually happened. So now we have here the menu registered and available here. If you click to understand and get more details, you're going to see localhost 5001, which is exactly the address of this. So if you click here, agent is alive and reachable. So it means that whenever we want to call this service, all we need to do is to get the information about the URL and port from console instead of having to put that on an app settings. In the next video, we are going to create the consumer, the client on the order service. Okay, so I see you there.